Welcome, everyone. First thing we'll do is check in on the minutes of October 7th and October 21st. Cynthia, what can you tell us about the minutes?
I will work on them after this meeting. The 27th is in good shape. I just have to listen to the recording for the prior one.
Okay, all right.
So
Hello,
we don't
Carl.
until after the hearing.
Hi.
We do.
We do have a meeting scheduled on the day of the hearing, the afternoon of the hearing.
Okay. It'd be good to take care of it that day.
Of course, then there will be the minutes from today as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right, thank you.
We'll do 3.
All right, thank you. All right, on our agenda,
Elise, can I just ask a question about that meeting on December 2nd?
Yeah.
Let's say whatever we don't really finish today, let's say we're going to revise some things in the PowerPoint or whatever, and we're going to look at them again at 3 p.m. Is there an ability after that meeting, like around 5 p.m., to change the PowerPoint a little again before we get to the 7:30 meeting? So I guess that's a question for Stephen or whoever's doing the PowerPoint.
So I have the PowerPoint at the moment, and we can decide who will author or support the PowerPoint for that meeting. From my perspective, we should post a meeting for 7 o'clock or 6:45 in advance of the public forum, so that we could get together early and set up for it, a public forum. And from my perspective, we have the ability to modify the PowerPoint right up until, showtime. I don't know how people feel about that.
It's good to know as a security blanket. I mean, the more we can finish today, the better, but to have the security blanket's great.
Yeah, I mean, it's just information from my perspective, where it's not like we're presenting a draft bylaw or something like that,
Right.
where you start tweaking the language, even during a public meeting.
Right, of course.
You're running into trouble. I think it's just a vehicle for information. So I think it can be modified right up to it, and even during if we needed to.
Yeah. Okay. So I would like to suggest that we have, that we schedule meetings. So we put on our calendars meetings on December 2nd and December 16th. This is following the first and third week cadence of Wednesday afternoons. Also January 6th and January 20th. Or maybe it would be January 21st. So that we're holding those dates. It would be January 6th and January 20th, 2021. And as far as everyone knows, is that a reasonable sequence of meetings, and are those reasonable weeks for the meetings?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have put all of the comments that I have received into
Elise,
the,
can I just interrupt you? I'm very sorry.
Go
I
ahead.
meant to. The hearing is not in the town calendar.
It is not. I thought it was posted. Okay.
The 2nd, is that correct?
December 2nd at 7:30 p.m.
No.
Okay, well, we need to post that. So we'll need to post that, and we'll need to post an advance meeting for the task force. How does 6:45 sound?
Sounds good.
Okay. All right, so we'll get those posted.
Sorry.
No, thank you. I appreciate the reminder. So we've been discussing these topics for several meetings. Many of you have sent comments about the PowerPoint or about some of the slides that we've looked at. I've tried to incorporate those into the PowerPoint. I thought I would share that today, and we would use that as our discussion platform, if that's agreeable. There are a couple of other items that we should check in on, or at least weave into our conversation, and that is the memo that Carrie LaFleur has sent around about the 5-year capital improvement program. This was a memo that was drafted by John Harris. So did everyone receive that this afternoon? All right, well, we'll want to check in on that. So let me get to the PowerPoint. See if I can share my screen here. Is that good? Everybody can see this?
Yep.
Okay. So of course, my idea is to build on this and use this as a presentation for the public forum as well. So there are a few background slides. The members of this task force, and you can see we have an open seat. So Terry, I wonder if you have an update on whether we're likely to have another member appointed, when we are likely to have another member appointed.
Let me talk to you about that offline, Elise, maybe right
Okay,
after the meeting, because you and I had a couple of emails back and forth, and I'm not sure where we're at.
okay, all right. This is a background slide that just sort of frames the timeline for the charge, how many times we met before March 20th when we paused for 6 months, and then the adjusted timeframe in the charge to June 30th, 2021. These are bullets that describe the purpose of the task force straight out of the charge. This is a slide that catalogs the work of the task force to date. I'm not sure we need this slide at the public hearing, but
I like,
yeah.
I was the one who commented that it should be moved up to this position. I think it's a real good way to introduce, first you're saying who we are, what our time frame is, and now what we've done so far. And it then leads into, why we're here tonight and why we investigate what we're.
Okay, thank you. So now we have a few slides that are that describes first the school's capital plan process and timeline. Jared reviewed these slides and he said that they were accurate. So there are 2 slides that take us from November 1st to October 31st in any calendar year. And then we have this slide, which Jared also refined. And Jared, I think I've got your comments in here accurately.
Look good.
I changed the title a little bit because I believe this is, these needs come out of annual assessments of the school facilities. Is that correct? Okay. And I like the footnote on this slide that the scope and scale determines the level of the need, the size of the project, essentially. Terry.
I think these school slides are really good, and I'm just a little concerned. I don't think we should take questions at this point, because I think the public will start asking about walkways and windows and all these things that are really not our main charge. So if our intent is to go through the whole thing and then take questions, these slides are perfect. If
So,
we stop and take questions here, we could get really bogged down with stuff that's kind of irrelevant to
So I'm interested in everyone's perspective on this. My strategy would be to try to tailor a 15-minute presentation for the public forum, and then to open it for discussion, questions, comments, etc. Not have any give and take during the 15-minute presentation. And I'd be happier if it were a 12-minute presentation, because I think our goal in the public forum is really to collect input from whomever attends. So I view our presentation as kind of setting the table on the topic and then opening it to feedback.
So, Elise, this is Prasha.
Yeah.
If that's the goal, it may be worth thinking about combining a couple of the slides together. Because it might, I understand this is a good list. I don't know that we need to share the whole list. We can give some examples of things that are typically tier 1,
Right.
typically tier 2, and leave the new facilities one as an example of a tier 3. And if we do that, plus we, combine it with a very high level process, you can just simply say, we're just describing the current process. Here are the timelines, how it works. Here's some examples, and kind of move on. So doing that with the schools plus the town may trim some of the time that you take to go through the slides.
Thank you. That's a very good suggestion. And I think it would be good to act on it. I mean, I think because some of this capital planning does focus on tier 1 and tier 2 level projects, and because that is not in our charge, if we're going to talk about tier 1 and tier 2 at all, at some point we need to pivot to just focus on tier 3. So a footnote like this might be a good pivot point.
Well, and the other thing is, I think this is the first time this footnote comes up, but
Yes.
I'm wondering whether it's worth introducing that concept
Earlier.
Yeah,
I think you're right. Yeah. So then we will probably agree that some of these slides should be reordered. We have a parallel slide for the town capital planning process, and perhaps this will be or should be adjusted slightly depending based on the memo that John Harris wrote. And then this is a slide that we begin to describe the different kinds of projects, how they're funded and their size. Yeah, Terry.
Please, I'm the one that put in the red. The red are the suggested changes. I don't propose that the red is going to stay in the final slide. I just wanted to show this group what I changed.
Right.
I think I took this language from the charge, and what the previous slide had was some wording that Hugh Lauer liked that I'm not sure we all really agreed to. Oops, different slide.
On this slide, you mean? Oh, no. Oh, you mean this slide, the previous iteration of this slide.
Yes.
Okay.
I changed it to match the wording of the charge.
Okay.
That's what the red is. I don't mean for it to stay red. I just wanted to show this group.
Thank you. So thank you for mentioning that, because throughout this slide deck, you will see red edits, because I also made modifications to slides and turned them red so that we could clearly see where the edits were in case we wanted to change, go back, etc. In any event, the whole point of this is that at some point in the presentation, we need to have this description of the different kinds of projects, size of projects, different kinds of funding. And we need to try to be sure that our nomenclature is congruent throughout the show, that we're not jumping around from calling large projects very large or tier 3 or debt excluded or whatever. So
can I ask you a question on that last piece? Does very large projects Do they always have to be exempt from Proposition 2.5? I thought that if the limit's 5 million, is it theoretically possible to fund it out of current budget?
Yeah, it's theoretically possible, so I hesitated to put that in. I wasn't sure. In fact, I put, first I put usually exempt, but it didn't really fit on the slide right. But I see it's not fitting anyway. So maybe change it back to usually exempt or often exempt or something, because it is theoretically possible that you pay the whole debt service on a middle school by just putting the principal on interest in the operating budget. We haven't done it, but
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, and I
the other
think-
way to do this is, for example, under 2 to 3%, you put in another bullet says within operating budgets. And then under 5%, you say via capital articles. And then under tier 3, you would change it to 5 million or whatever it is. And then you have a bullet that says what you said, Terry, and leave the subject to. So that way, if you want to make it fit, you can do it that way too, formatting wise. But otherwise, this gives it the appearance that it's defined that way.
And I guess if we're gonna talk about that, the only thing I'd say is, I think you mean excluded, not exempt.
Excluded, yes. Yep. So I can operate Zoom and try to facilitate this meeting, but it's really difficult for me to also edit slides as we're going. And for screen sharing, I'd be popping in and out. So my plan is,
Yeah, at least I'm happy to, I have the presentation in an email. I'm happy to, if you want to stop sharing, I can share and make the edits as we go if you'd like.
okay, that'd be great.
and I can edit the slide since I sent it in and it's separate.
So I'm reluctant to turn the meeting into an editing session,
Right.
but I'm very interested in capturing as much live comments as possible. So Stephen, let's try it. If do I have to do something? You can share your screen.
No, I'm
right?
just, yeah, no, I'm just going back to try and, I thought I had your email open because I had
Okay.
the agenda open, but now I realize that I don't. So I'll just give you 2 shakes of a lamb's tail.
Okay, all right.
Oh, wait, I want the version from 1:13 PM.
You want the version,
From,
Yeah.
sorry, no, from this morning. You sent it this morning.
let's see,
Yeah, it's a revised PowerPoint. Yep.
the revise,
Yeah,
yeah,
okay. Okay. Here we go.
yep, that's it.
Okay, have we made any edits before? I don't think we have. But it was kinda quick.
No, we just talked about adjusting some of the capital planning process and timeline slides, but we didn't particularly edit them. So I think let's leave that where it is. So as we move through this, so I guess the question is, Parishar's other question here is, are the very large projects, $5 million projects or more, always going to be excluded from Proposition 2.5? Or would any of them ever be funded within the levy limit?
So, can I, sorry. Was that a general question or were you asking that something specific?
No, that's a rhetorical question. I don't know the answer to that.
So I think instead of, how about, if I could make a suggestion, because maybe say capital outlay, and then in the parenthetical notation, you say 2 to 3% of property taxes. And then down below, you say often approved within operating budgets. And then in the next one is debt related. And in the parenthetical notation, you say 5% of property taxes. And then below you say approved as part of the capital warrant articles. And then down below say occasionally, because I could see a scenario where a tier two could
Wrong
end
with
up
the way it
as,
is.
a debt exclusion. So then you could say sometimes or occasionally subject to debt exclusion. And then very large projects would be up to 5 million or $5 million or more. And then down below you would say often excluded from proposition 2.5. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I have made those edits. If I could share my screen for a minute, I think I've made almost the edits that you said.
All right, I'll stop.
So while Terry, you pull that up, the 2 to 3% is pretty clear. When it says 5%, the natural question, well, maybe it's not a natural question, I'm an idiot, but like, is that 5% on top of the 2 to 3%? Like, what, is it additive? Like, is it the size of the individual project? I guess I'm not quite sure what we mean by 5% in that case.
So I'd like Carrie to have a chance to talk about this because Carrie, in your email today, you said that the capital improvement process, tier 1 and tier 2, a maximum or single year impact of 2 million.
Sure. So the answer to Parishar's question is it is the combination of the two. So in any one year, we have a total of 7 to 8% of our budget dedicated to debt service for projects that have already been approved, with 2 to 3% in cash outlay, no more than 5% in borrowed debt service. So, and then just to clarify what I sent earlier today, the current process that we follow, really our tier 2 today would top out at about $2 million in any one year. Because of the size of our existing capital improvement plan, it would be very difficult for us to include a single project with an impact of more than 2 million in any one year. So I know that's different than what we've been talking about, but that's what exists right now.
Okay, so it seems to me that we could probably get most of that information on this one slide. Terry, are you going to that slide?
Oh, you don't see it right now?
I see the cover sheet.
Oh. Okay, let me do it again. Sorry.
Sometimes you have that problem.
Parishar's very good at walking people through how to share. I know from experience.
How's that?
There you go.
Is it there now? I don't have in the last part that Carrie was just talking about. I think I have the rest of it in.
Yeah, so I think we should also add under very large projects, $5 million, right? We should put our definition there.
Yeah.
Exceeding $5 million in 2 or more phases or something like that, tier 3.
And we might also want to qualify it to say it's the proposed, right? Because the title says current system.
Right.
Right.
And then I think maybe 2 to 3% of property taxes for all tier 1 projects. That's what we really mean, right? It's a total.
Yeah,
Shouldn't exceed 2 to 3%.
okay. All right, so. And then the 5% of property taxes for all tier 2 projects,
Exactly.
right?
Yes.
And then very large projects, which would be excluded from Proposition 2.5, would be tier 3. But couldn't we put our proposed definition here?
Yeah, I agree. I would just make it clear that it's a proposed definition.
Great.
That's all.
Yeah, okay. Okay, Terry, are you gonna roll to the next slide?
No, I only have this one slide.
Okay, all right. Well, then please give up your
I'll stop
screen
sharing,
share.
sorry.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you.
yep.
So Stephen, you want to take it back or do you want me to take it back? Okay,
See your answer?
thank you. So if you'll scroll to the next slide, then is where we have our draft definition or proposed definition of a very large project. And I feel like it's, I have a little tension about making a lot of this definition in the public forum, because I don't think this is the main, this is not where the action is for me, but it is part of the work that we would do. So I'm willing to report on it.
So my thought is, one of the committee's charges was to define very large project.
Mhm.
And so this is a report out to the
Right.
community. And so you say draft definition. I mean, we did vote on it.
We did vote. It should say proposed definition, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or committee definition or something like that.
Yeah.
I guess proposed, sure. Typing with all these people watching.
Yeah, I know. Sorry. Well, you jumped in when I said I don't do this online, so. Okay. So for our presentation, the question is, where does this go? Should it go further up front as part of the task force work today? Define very large project, put it in there. Then we have another slide that describes phase projects. And these perhaps could be combined into one slide.
I like where it is, Elise, because I think if memory serves me, slide 10 is the end, if you will, of the introduction, at least for now, of the current process. You're quickly going through the current process,
Mhm.
and you're ending with on slide 10, a proposed definition for tier 3. Now let us share one, maybe 2 slides, peel the onion layer a little bit more on what the 5 million means and how we talk about it and how we thought about it. And that would be these 2 slides. We can either combine them or keep them, but I think position wise, it flows nicely there.
Do others agree?
I agree, and I think that even though you have 2 slides, you can go through it even quicker than if it was 1 slide. If you try to put too many words on 1 slide, it actually takes longer for people to absorb it.
Right, okay.
Even though we have it in 2 separate slides, I think you can go through it pretty quickly.
Okay, so then this sequence of slides will effectively be our pivot from tier 1 and tier 2 projects to tier 3 projects. And considering a process for very large projects. Okay,
So in that case, can I scroll back for a second, Elise?
please.
Well, I don't need to scroll back. I think maybe then in between slide 10 and slide 11, maybe you could restate the committee's charge
Okay,
to say, because sometimes it's helpful. People won't remember that from the beginning of the presentation, and you can restate committee's charge was to define very large projects and develop a process for tier 3. And that's the section of the presentation we're going into. So if I go back, background charge, and then background is,
next slide, I think maybe. No,
I think it's this one. Is the purpose to identify a process very large? Yeah, it's this
Yeah.
one.
okay.
That's a good idea, Stephen.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Right. So the very large project, the phase projects, and then we have the project criteria slide. So
Sorry.
The red in this slide are edits that I made based on input from Kate Hanley. And she was interested in, her suggestion was that we be more specific with our criteria to clearly link to the language of the Sustainable Concord Plan. And so that's what I've tried to do here.
Where's our slide on the criteria that Stephen drafted? That maybe should come before this one or with.
No, this is that slide edited.
Yeah. Well, you-
Yeah, okay, I see. I
This
see.
is the slide that used to say ranked and had 10 items.
Got it. Okay, so the only suggestion I have then is where it says in red at the top, linked to the Sustainable Concord Plan, to just make that text a little smaller.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So disclaimer, none of these slides have been edited to be congruent for font, size, text, number of words on the slides, any of that. It's just language. They're just raw slides.
You have people for that.
Yeah, because this definitely could be clearer if there were fewer words, definitely.
Yeah, right.
Good.
Okay,
Sorry.
that's good. All right. So we perhaps we should say proposed project evaluation criteria.
You're
And
doing that
be,
same thing.
yeah, be consistent about that. Yeah,
Oh, I guess it's all caps too.
yeah, okay.
So I'm kind of curious, Elise, in your mind, as you go from the definition of what a phased project is and provide folks more context on slide 11, for example. Then you go to slide 11 and you get into the project evaluation criteria. Is that the right place, or should we talk about, well, these are the definitions and now let's talk about a process, and within that process, there's evaluation criteria. It feels like we've missed a step. I don't know if anybody else feels that way.
So I guess I don't feel like we missed a step. I feel like how when you're presenting this, or when we are presenting this, you say the purpose was to identify to anticipate or identify process for anticipating very large projects. The first step the board did, this task force did, was to define what is a very large project, and here's the definition. But we also acknowledge that one single project may have more phases that may be individually below a certain amount, but combined or more get you into that very large category. So, and just a quick note, why do we phase projects? Here's why we phase projects. And then you say, so then now that we know what a very large project is, how do we evaluate them? And these are proposed evaluation criteria. So I feel like this flows really well.
Okay, fair enough.
So I do think it's fair, though, to discuss whether or not the step that is missed here is the needs assessment. And, you know, you wouldn't be evaluating a project before you had defined a project, which you would define during a needs assessment. And if we remember back to the set of school slides, there was a needs assessment slide reviewed annually for the tier 1 and tier 2 projects. So if there is a, you know, so I guess the question is, does the town have a similar needs assessment review list that gets assessed and reviewed annually?
It's a little different in that the schools have basically buildings and grounds.
Right.
And so it's kind of a fixed, and this does a good job outlining, and I don't speak for Jared and Lori, but it's a fixed set of things that you annually look at. the town has a fixed set of things as well, but a lot of times it's either a new initiative, something like a new project, a park or something like that. Or it could be something, that is not a projected needs assessment, but a pending failure or something like that. So it's not always as simple to do it the way the schools have laid out on the town side.
So I wonder if we should include a slide that categorizes the kinds of projects that might come up on the town's needs assessment list. As you say, new initiatives, building and grounds projects, potential failures, or opportunism, or the unforeseen somehow.
Or perhaps, Elise, I think that's a good idea, and maybe we also add a couple examples from the recent past. The middle school, Giroux Pond, to add 3 or 4 of those as just examples of the kinds of things that if we had had a process, they would have qualified under our definition of tier 3.
Mm-hmm.
Bring it to life for folks.
Yeah. What do we think about that?
Yeah, that sounds good. And one thing that we really haven't discussed yet as a group is whether we're going to include land purchases. I know some people only want to basically do building renovations, but I consider a big land purchase like Balls Hill to be a big capital investment that should be part of this process and should be listed as an example of something that we did recently. But I don't think our whole group has really agreed on land versus buildings.
You raise a good point about the property purchases. I'm not sure that a property purchase is a capital investment unless there's a planned project on that land purchase. Like a
What
land
about
purchase.
trails?
Well,
What about if
land purchased for conservation, I wouldn't think is a capital project.
Sorry, can't hear you.
I said land purchased for, say, conservation. I don't know that doesn't feel like a capital project, but I've never really thought of it that way.
We have often included those in our capital plan.
Right.
The Balls Hill was enterprise. The last couple of ones have involved the enterprise fund, so they haven't necessarily been included, but we have included some of those purchases or a dollar amount placeholder for, some unknown land purchase to be opportunistic.
Right.
Well, it seems to me that land purchases are opportunistic, and they should be identified as a category, whether or not they're purely, whether they're a true capital planning expenditure or not. I mean, and how are we going to handle the enterprise issues? Just not deal with them?
I don't think that was a part of the charge, was it?
No.
Unless we're paying for them out of tax, out of, funding them through taxes
As opposed to rates.
as opposed to the rates, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was general funds projects was the charge in this case.
Mhm.
And if Kerry says that if land purchases have been included as capital items, then I'm fine saying that and defining them that way.
Well, generally, they're considered as a capital investment. I mean,
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, that's good.
Okay. All right, so the only discussion we've had so far about prioritizing projects has had to do with this evaluation criteria list. And shall we try to describe how priorities are developed or how our objectives for prioritizing and sequencing projects are established to date? Before we roll into the slides that compare advantages and disadvantages for standing committee.
Is there a
Well,
need to prioritize certain criteria over others at this point?
I don't think we should prioritize these criteria. But the question is, does this set of criteria, will that alone define priorities for projects? Or are there other
I think this is a really
objectives?
good list to bring to the public forum, and maybe people will think of others. But I think that the next slide after this should be the one saying governance structural options. Keep going, go down one more. Okay, I think this is where we want to say, I think that status quo one should be the top one. And we should say, this is what we're doing now. And these are the other 3 options that we're considering. So in other words, I don't even think that we're ready yet to talk about setting priorities. I think
Yeah.
what this slide does is in each system, there's a different process for setting priorities. So it sort of introduces the whole concept of sequencing and setting priorities. Like we have a status quo, or we could do a standing committee and they would prioritize, and it shows the different options of how we do it.
Okay, then perhaps the governance structure options title needs a subtext of a
Right.
process for setting priorities or something like that.
Yeah,
Or establish a process for setting priorities.
right.
Well, I think it's more, it's a decision-making. and
Okay,
review. It's really a public review process is what we're talking about, because right now status quo is they are reviewed publicly by the school committee, the Public Works Commission, or the select board, or some combination. And then they are reviewed and approved by town meeting voters. And so this would
Okay.
add layers to that, is really what we're saying.
so what would your subtitle be for the slide? Or would you not have one?
Well, just rename the title. Instead of governance structure options, you could say, options for setting priorities, or
Planning structure options,
I think,
mechanisms of how this would be done, right?
well, as I was thinking about this in kind of our overall charter, I thought it's more than setting priorities. But it also, because I think we're also trying to figure out, do we unify it or not? Is there a process to maintain a capital plan if there is one that we recommend, et cetera? So that's, I think if we call it setting priorities, it might be a little bit narrower than what we intend. And clearly, the reason I put down governance is, again, I don't know that anybody's in favor of this, but you could actually have an independent, we didn't list it here, but you could have a decision-making body, not that any of these say that. So maybe something other than just priorities.
So how do you feel about this title?
Yeah, can I just, so Prashar, it's not, you can't have a decision-making body.
I
Because
agree.
the warrant, the select board decides on the warrant and town meeting decides on the funding. And then the voters, and as we're talking, likely will decide on the ultimate funding at the ballot box. And so those decision-making authorities aren't going to be changed by what we're doing here. And so I think it's more do we want to add another layer of oversight? And the reason why I think it's important to lay out what we currently do, like I agree with Terry, the status quo one should be first. And so I want to make it clear that there already is public review and approval of capital projects through school committee, select board, public works commission, depending on the thing, town meeting, and then voters. And maybe this is really a Gantt chart instead of a table or something, where we kind of do the lines of decision making. I'm not really visualizing it, but I think you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, so I personally don't think we have had enough conversation to draw the Gantt chart about this. But I think that I think this slide describes some options, maybe not every option, but enough differences so that people could begin to, think about whether one would be preferable to them over the other. So Parashar, you made this slide. Could I ask you to reorder it, to reverse the, to put the status quo on top? It probably should be, instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, it should be 4, 3, 2, 1. Or
Yeah, no,
4, 3,
That's fine. Yep, I'll do that.
4, 3, 1, 2, something like that.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And may I ask, I think this is one of the most important slides that we have. And I'm wondering, Elise, I'm thinking you're going to be making the presentation. Is that right?
Well, don't jump to conclusions.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
whoever's making the presentation, whether it's you, Elise, or are you going to read through every single one of these bullet points? I'm kind of two minds. That would take a really long time and be kind of tedious, but on the other hand, you could like really explain.
So if you're asking me if I'm going to present it, I don't know the answer to that. But if I were presenting it, I would not be reading the slide. I will not be reading any slide.
Right.
Because
I
the audience
think-
can read faster than I can speak it.
So, I mean, we have a little bit of time to figure this out. I would recommend a team approach to presentation.
I agree.
But the other thing is, if while we're talking about, can I ask for some artistic license on this to kind of demonstrate? Because I think that I agree that this is an important slide, and it's very dense. And because we're going to be talking and going through the slides, I think this can be broken up into a number of slides. So if you just, can I just have a minute of free range here?
Yes, of course you can.
So, and I'm hoping
While you do that, Stephen, that slide was meant for internal deliberation, so you should definitely take free rein of the words. I would not present the whole slide. I agree.
So something like this, where you have current, and then it's
And-
select board,
Yeah, I think-
town meeting, and it's not gonna look
What
like
it
this,
is,
but
yeah, what it is.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then, kind of go through, and then down below. Damn it. Down below you have pros and cons. Okay, of each thing, and then you go to another, and then you have another slide that says proposed. This would be current, or whatever, so then it would be, here's the flow of how we do it currently, here's the pros and cons, and then you build the next one, and you're talking, if we're gonna go with every single thing here, it's 4 slides, which I think is fine, because it'll take the same amount of time to move through them as it would to go through this table.
Right, okay.
But I think my only question is, do we want to go through all 4 of these options in a public presentation? Or are we agreed that these are the 4 options we're presenting, or are we going to consider one option that we're going to endorse? I take that back. I know we talked a lot about, sorry, Now I said it out loud. I know we talked about presenting a few options, and getting feedback from the public before we made that decision. I think we did say that.
So I'm in favor of presenting at least 3 of these options: the status quo, the enhanced current system, and then the advisory standing committee. Maybe there are enough distinctions between the 2 options of advisory standing committee to present 4. Either way is fine with me. I don't know how other people feel, but I'm very interested in presenting the options to get as a range of possibilities to give the public an opportunity to give us some feedback before we really narrow our field into one recommendation.
So Elise, let me throw this question out to you, because I think the real distinction between 1 and 2 is who's on the committee, right? And I think it was, is it Weston or Westford, one of the towns presented at the League of Women Voters in January.
Right,
I
Westford.
listened to that session, and row number 2 here is modeled after what they do.
Mhm.
Simple, right? And so I have no strong feelings between 1 and 2, for instance, on this row, for example. The public may, or, you guys as members of the committee might, but that was the only reason I made a distinction between 1 and 2.
Well, and the real distinction is the department heads, right?
Yeah, so apparently over there at Westford, it's the department heads and the school folks that get together as a committee to develop the plan and move it forward.
Mhm.
That's really number 2. Number 1 is you don't have the department heads. It's modeled after most other town committees where it's citizen members.
Mhm.
Maybe
Okay.
combine both of those options into one of these, those 2, and state those 2 options as includes mostly residents or mostly department heads, just as one of those bullet points on the structure column there.
So
I think that's enough for people to understand that there are different ways of approaching it, and we're not, we haven't determined that yet, but it's really combines it into that one category rather than, blowing people away with too many different options.
would you say that the second option is in fact the enhanced modification of the current planning process?
I'd say some, yeah.
No, I don't think
Well,
so.
there's no advisory standing committee. Certainly there's no resident in it, even, which shows in that number 1. It's just, the difference between is the weighting of it, how it's weighted.
Can
I think is a point that obviously needs to be considered very carefully, but not at this time.
can I make it even more confusing?
You can try.
Okay, I'm going to. So I think what I see here is, and in terms of the different types of committees, we're going through this in real time with our Transportation Advisory Committee, which is a combination of staff and residents. And the reason why I pushed for that model was because the Transportation Advisory Committee has multiple functions. One is, traffic management, which is kind of operational, and the other one is policy driven. Capital planning is very different. It's just a project evaluation committee. So and given the, I don't say confusion, but, I think in Concord, if you were going to have a committee, and I'm not necessarily endorsing that, but if you were going to have a freestanding committee, I think it would be like the CPC, because town staff are the ones advocating for the project. And you could also make the case that the current process is effectively a committee of town staff that come up with things and evaluate the project. So instead of having it be option A for standing committee, resident volunteers, option B, town staff, I would advocate for, for the purpose of this presentation, option A, standing committee, volunteer residents supported by staff. Option B, and this is where this could be either option B or part of enhanced project-based committees.
So there's a large, if we're talking about the Westford Capital Planning Committee, so there is a large distinction because they have elected officials on their committee.
Right.
So they have a school committee member and they have a select person. So I do think that that's a big distinction.
So like I said, I think, we haven't talked about project-based committees in any of this, but I think most times where this happens, especially if it's a debt exclusion, a committee gets formed for that project. I told you I was going to confuse you more.
Yeah, well, of course, what you're talking about there goes more into the building committee subject, which is a different subject. I mean, and of course, then a whole different proposal that we have a permanent building committee. But anyway, that's a different subject than the capital planning part of it.
Well, actually, no, that's a good point, actually, what Stephen said. And it could be a different process for supervising the projects, but, and I hadn't thought of this when I put this down here, but you could have a committee like this also manage and leads a strong word, but manage, if you will, have under its purview the projects once they get approved, the very large projects, of course.
Now, that would be a permanent building committee, which is
I guess,
separate.
Carl, it doesn't have to be, I guess is what I'm saying. We may think of it, but it doesn't have to be.
It would turn into that automatically. I can tell you from personal experience that would.
Many towns have that structure, and then they also have the capital planning structure as well. They treat them as two separate things. The permanent building committee usually has contractors, architects, engineers on it, and so on, and those things seem to work pretty well in terms of managing a project.
Right. I agree with Carl. I think a permanent building committee is really different. And even a project building committee, such as the middle school, that's like a whole different animal. This capital committee that we're talking about is a different animal. I think that we have several options that are not showing up on this slide, and they don't need to be. I think this slide is saying these are the ones we're considering and we want to get your input. For example, Elise and I are talking to somebody who wants to see a design review process. Well, that's not an option that we're talking about today.
That's not what this is. That's not what, yeah.
Exactly. And the same with the permanent building committee. That's not what this is. And another option that we talked about a few minutes ago was a standing committee that had authority. We're not talking about that option either. So I
Town
think,
meeting has authority.
Right.
so I think
Exactly.
what we should say is there's a lot of different ways to do it. And these are the 3 or 4 options that we're considering. We've ruled out some others. These are the ones we're considering.
Okay, so,
So for the second option, I would like to include select board and school committee. If we're really
So-
going.
so
Western-
you'd like it to say more specifically than,
The second.
more
So I
specifically
was-
than, yeah.
So based on what I was hearing from the discussion before I start going rogue here on the editing, I was going to suggest you have an advisory standing capital planning committee, okay? Just bear with me. I can talk like that. Capital planning committee. And then here you would talk about composition / appointments options. And then we can kind of get in there and say, staff, residents, electeds. Geez. It's auto-correcting.
It's et cetera. That's good.
Yeah, so, and then you could have, in the second option, which I think is an important distinction, permanent building committee.
Oh,
Oh, whoa.
No, no.
No, wait,
it's a
no.
different.
So
Talking about permanent
Okay.
building.
Yeah. this isn't our charge.
Okay.
Which the finance committee, at least a couple of years ago, was advising that the town create, in addition to this capital planning process.
Okay. So then you could
I'd like,
probably,
so one more time, I'd like the second option to include school committee and select board.
well, that's, I think, okay. So you could have that, you could have different compositions up here. That's what I was trying to go for. You're talking about an advisory committee.
Mhm.
And then the second thing would be, how would that be composed? But it's still under the advisory committee umbrella.
Yeah,
But I think it's a big distinction to not have any elected officials.
No, but you could. That's where I changed this thing.
yeah,
where
that's,
you could have elected
Right, but the transportation committee has no elected officials on it. And I don't think that's a good model, to be honest.
I think what,
but isn't that, again, for this presentation, I mean, we're presenting things at a pretty high level,
right,
rather than getting down in the weeds and determining all this sort of stuff before the presentation. We could just say these things are that, lay out some of the things that would be discussed and worked on once we sort of go ahead with creating this committee.
right. Right, so I think what they're doing is they're just combining, Cynthia, options 1 and 2 and just saying, one option is to have an advisory standing capital planning committee and we'll figure out who's on it later.
But I don't want to take up this meeting time, but I do think it's a huge distinction to have an all staff committee versus a committee that has elected officials and citizens.
Cynthia, I completely agree with you. I think what Carl is saying and what I agree with is this presentation isn't where we're delving into that distinction. It's really, if we decide at the end of all of this, there should be a standing committee, then we get into the discussion of, well, who should be on it, who should appoint it.
Okay.
So this is
It's
process.
laying out that there are distinctions to be made, but yeah, it's just. too
So
much-
it seems to me that we have the room in these 4 options to have an advisory standing committee that is staff, department head, staff only, maybe a finance committee like number 2, and that we also have an option where there's an advisory standing committee with elected officials, which is fundamentally the distinction. The elected officials would be school, select board, school committee, housing authority. Right? I mean, those are our elected officials. So,
And regional school district, but.
Regional
it's the
school
same. I mean,
district,
it's the same.
right. So that seems to me to be a distinction that is worth presenting.
At least I agree with you. And the reason I think it is worth presenting the distinction is because the considerations change depending on the composition,
Yes.
right? And that's why I think even at a high level, Carl, I agree, maybe you don't want to go into too much of the detail on the distinctions, but there are some major considerations that would go into the composition.
I mean,
So-
fundamentally, the responsibility and authority changes when there are elected officials on a standing committee. The dynamics of the committee change and the authority potentially changes.
So maybe
Okay.
the thing to do
So I
then is,
think we're keeping the slide basically the way it is, but I think we haven't really spent any time discussing the third option there, enhancing, modifying the current process. I think that's something that we still need to flesh out more, unless we want to just wait till the public hearing. But I think somebody might say, well, can you describe how that process is going to work? And I don't know. Who's going to answer that? We haven't really talked about that.
so I think because we're working in this table format, we're having a hard time thinking outside the box, literally. And so
I mean,
think
all
if
those
we-
boxes, the,
So I think what maybe a different way to look at this is, because I guess I feel strongly that I don't view an advisory committee. I don't want to say this right because I don't want to make it seem like I'm not hearing you. I guess an advisory committee is one option. Within that one option, you have sub options of how is it composed, and I agree with you. How that committee functions is going to be very different depending on the composition. But that's still under that same option of an advisory committee. And so I don't know, I guess, so I was thinking like one slide advisory, option 1 advisory committee, and then it's, composition, and then you'd have staff, staff plus residents only, staff plus elected officials, you'd have those different options laid out below that. And then you'd have another slide that says enhance, modify current town school planning processes. And then you have options, a project-based, review or something like that. Then we can flesh out those options. It's just a thought.
So Stephen,
I think that simplifies things in other words, you'd say have 3 slides.
Yes.
so are you willing to do a draft of those to clearly show your
Yes.
decision tree?
Yes.
Thank
Yes, I
you.
will.
And soon, yes?
I mean, I can start typing as people talk right now. I'm happy
Okay,
to do that.
well, I think it would be helpful to see your diagram and
So okay, let's go through the rest of the presentation. If we start talking about other stuff, I can stop sharing and work on it as we go.
okay. All right, let's just, so these slides that catalog the advantages, and the next one, which are the disadvantages of standing committee, I think are, products of our conversations, but may not need to be shown in the public forum, especially if we have a nice diagram that that describes the structure.
Well,
We could,
I think that it might be simplest if the thing that Stephen's doing just says, option 1, what it's called, and the composition of the committee. And then option 2, same thing, option 3. And then we get into showing these 2 slides, which we've already done. And this should be really the guts of the meat of our presentation and what we really want to get citizen feedback on.
yeah, right.
It is important to include these.
Okay, so I mean, it seems to me that the diagram of the options could have the advantages and disadvantages laced into that.
It might be too busy of a slide, is what I'm worried.
Maybe, okay.
Yeah.
You try to put all this plus the composition and the name of the committee and,
Yeah, well, it's a lot. It's complicated. Yeah.
yeah.
So the one thing I would consider, so I agree, I think there's a balance we have to strike, but if we're gonna do advantages, disadvantages of one option, I think for balance, we might want to consider doing it for the other options. And again, to Elisa's point, maybe you just lace the pros and cons into each one as a talk track. And maybe you move the rest of this into an appendix that you don't have to present to. And if anybody's interested in referencing, they've got the full set of slides back.
Right, we can pull it up. Yep.
Yeah. You got to simplify.
Yep. Okay, and so then the next slide is the task force recommendation slide draft. And so I view this kind of slide as a summary slide of like, okay, this is what we told you. And then open it for discussion.
So Elise, what does this mean? Integrate town and school tier 3 project list.
That means have, have all of the contemplated tier 3 projects for town and school on one list in one place. So
Oh,
if,
okay,
yeah.
so this doesn't mean that we've chosen one of the options. This just means put together, when you say integrate,
Mhm.
that's just having a document that shows all of them. They're not prioritized and sequenced yet.
Well, I don't know whether they would be prioritized or sequenced or not. It would depend on whether they are prioritized and sequenced in each of the lists.
Yeah. And the
Right, let me
that-
explain what I mean. I guess when I read this, I thought that it meant that the task force is recommending one of the options from that previous slide, namely the one that said enhanced town school coordination, that third option. But I think what you're saying here is we're not recommending any of them yet, but we are recommending to put together a integrated project list. Is that right?
Correct.
So
Now,
we
we've got a sub bullet here that the combined list shows recommended
Okay.
sequence, but I don't know that that would be realistic. I mean,
If you're capital planning, again, we're talking about when this, whatever structure is established, if they're doing capital planning for, a 10, 15, whatever, wouldn't that be what they would be doing?
Yes,
I mean,
misread this and
Right.
thought it meant that we had chosen one of the options.
so the thing is, Carl, the reason I say the recommended sequence, I mean, from my standpoint, this is complicated. So let's imagine that we have a combined and integrated list, and it has on it a middle school, and modifications to Ripley, and a new public facility department, a new public facility building, and a conference center, and a solar field. I mean, whatever it has on it. I'm not certain that this recommended sequence in 2020 would get it right for the sequence that the town and school were going to take up these projects. I can imagine that there might be a timeline range that would go with any one of these projects, so that we would say the middle school will surely be taken up in the next 5 years. The public facility project will surely be taken up in years 5 to 12. I mean, I think it would be a range, but it wouldn't necessarily preclude going in that order.
So I guess how I
the
would say
plan
this-
doesn't preclude, anything down the line unless, well, I mean, maybe in the Soviet Union it did, but I mean, the way we plan now, you develop a plan and as every year, you reiterate that process and your priorities change.
Right. And your needs change. Your needs
Yeah.
change, your priorities change, your funding mechanism may change.
Right.
Yeah.
So we needed one more little bullet saying updated annually.
Yes,
Well, and that's already a part of the base process.
yeah,
So I changed it to showing prioritization, because you can have priorities, but priorities, I think it's less rigid than sequence. I agree with Elise. I think calling it a sequence is tough because, you could have an opportunity for a building comes on the market that's ideal for, what is number 2 in the batting order. And you say, well, we haven't gotten to the middle school first, so we can't take advantage of this great opportunity for our second need because it's not in sequence. But if it's a priority, you can adjust. You can adjust it.
well, until the thing is under construction, the plans can always change.
Right.
It is really both, actually, right? So it's prioritization to help figure out where we should put our money in what sequence. But at
Yes,
least for the short term, it is an expected sequence, if you will, right? Pending what happened this year, for example, with COVID. Stephen, looking back on the finance report, we had an expected sense of capital projects, tier 1 and 2. We made big adjustments because of what happened. So I think it's a combination of both prioritization as well as expected sequence, some words along those lines, maybe.
I think there's a sequencing implied in prioritization that doesn't limit you to some kind of order. So that's why, I mean, I'm fine to change it back, but I thought prioritization was what we were.
No,
trying
I'm
to get
suggesting
at.
keeping both. Use both words or phrases to capture both concepts.
Mhm.
Yep.
It could just be a slash, prioritization slash sequencing or sequence, desired sequence, whatever. Okay, so I'm mindful of the time. I'm going to now ask for public comment because if Carlin is still here, she may have a comment.
I am. Thank you very much, Elise. Carlin Reed, 83 Wits End. I appreciate the discussion. I've identified 3 questions you might want to consider because I suspect they will come your way. And your presentation does not answer these 3 questions yet. I'm just going to list the 3 questions so you know if you want to take a stab at them now, fine. Otherwise, just think about them. Number 1, why did you choose a threshold level of $5 million instead of $3 million? Especially since your chief finance officer has said that tier 2 realistically tops out at $2 million. That's the first question. Second question is, if you choose to have an advisory standing committee, will it be a public body? And if not, why not? This is in reference to what Stephen mentioned regarding the concerns over the Transportation Advisory Committee. That will flare up again. And the third question is, if you choose an advisory standing committee, why must it be advisory and not have authority? Okay, those are the 3 questions that I've identified so far. Thanks, that's it.
Thank you. That's quite clear. All right. So I'd like to go to, I'd like to talk just for a couple minutes about what our game plan is over the next couple of weeks. So it seems to me that we need the presentation refined and shortened. And we need to make assignments as to who will present what portions of the presentation. And
Please,
so, yeah, I'd like to do that. Yep, Stephen.
I hate to do this. I have a strong feeling right now that I don't think we're going to be ready for the second.
All right, well, let's discuss that. 2 weeks ago, we thought about deferring the public forum to a date in January. What do you think?
Well, can I explain my feeling?
Of course.
Because I think one of the when I was looking back at the presentation, on one of the slides last slides we left off on, I need to find it. Actually, I'm going to share my screen again. Sorry, just to illustrate my point. So this language here, because Carlin asked about this, and this was something that was on my mind. The authority question. The authorities are already set.
Right.
And we need to, I see this all the time with creep, with committees. And I think we need to be clear that what we're talking about is always going to be advisory.
Yeah.
Because the authorities in the charter or in the statute are already set and aren't going to be changed by this process. And that's not to say that the authorities couldn't be changed by charter change or bylaw change, but we need to be clear that what we're talking about is inherently advisory because of the established authorities. And
Right.
so,
And so to that point, Stephen, and excuse me for interrupting you, I think Carlin's question is not to challenge that, but is to just simply say, be precise, be specific. And so, and I think that we could take a poll, but my guess is that everybody on this committee would totally agree with you that the authority is set. It's one of the tricky things about having an advisory committee that has authority, has the individuals who hold authority on the committee with people who do not hold the authority.
Well, I mean, we have 65 boards and committees. Many of them are advisory in the way that we're contemplating this committee. So this isn't something new. There's not some new
Right.
trick we're making up
No.
here.
No, but I think she was right in saying we should clarify.
Right. And I think just the fact that this does have a clear answer means maybe we are ready to proceed. Before today's meeting, I didn't think we were ready at all. But looking at this, I think we made so much progress today, and I think we're actually are ready. And I think Carlin is saying these are the questions that are going to come up. I would say on all three of those questions, we already do know the answers. We know why we set it at 5 million. We know whether it's going to be a public committee, and we know why it can't have authority. And I'm sure we'll get lots of other questions, but maybe we are ready.
So the only other thing I would say to that, and I apologize again for being too much of this conversation, but the slides that we're going to show the options and then the sub options.
Right.
I think that's going to take another. I would think that would take another session for us to agree upon what we're going to present to the community. And by my calendar, the next meeting is the forum, right?
Right.
No, that's why I asked if after our 3 o'clock meeting on the 2nd, if we could still change it again. In other words, Stephen, if you brought in.
Okay, let's just have a vote. Who would like to keep the forum on the 2nd? Raise your hand. 1, 2. Who would like to move the forum? 3. And there are 1, 2, let's see, Parashar is not going to vote. Carrie, Laurie, you're not voting. Jared, you're not voting.
I can go either way. That's why I didn't vote.
Okay.
I think the schools are ready, but I hear
Yeah.
maybe we're not ready. And I think we did answer a lot of questions today, so.
Yeah, I don't think it's like another month. I just think it's between. Anyway, if Thanksgiving wasn't in between here and there, I would maybe feel differently about it.
Mhm.
Well, it might end up being another month because of, what happens in those months. I mean, trying to do it like on December 24th or something like that would.
That'd be great. What else are we gonna do?
So do we have a proposed date in January?
And we would have to determine a date in January. If it were on one of our meeting days, it would be January 6th or January 20th.
Mhm.
Well, at least this is Prosher again.
Yeah.
I hear what Stephen's saying, but I think one of the things, maybe the committee should keep in mind, task force should keep in mind is it doesn't have to be perfect. And we shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I think publicly it's okay to say, some of these are good questions we'll have to go back and consider. We're doing this at a stage in the process precisely to get input so we can change our minds or course correct. And I
Right.
think if you set it up that way, I don't think you're going to get a bad reaction from the folks that attend.
Okay.
I mean, I was just thinking, even if it was just the 9th, a week later, it would give us, I think, a little more breathing room on the 2nd at our regular meeting to kind of clarify these last remaining. I mean, it's more than Scrivener's stuff we're trying to fix up when you're talking about the options that we're presenting for standing committee. So
Right.
I think it would just give us a little more breathing room. That's all. And honestly,
Okay.
I agree with Bashar. If we roll with the 2nd, fine, we'll make it work.
Jeremy, are you listening in? No.
I heard my name. I was doing something else in the background. So
Okay.
what you need?
Would you know offhand if it were possible to move the public forum to December 9th?
I would be able to tell you that yes, that is something we could do. Do you have another date in mind?
No, it's scheduled for the 2nd, and so the 9th is possible?
I don't think it got posted. So right now there is no.
Right.
The only other meeting on the 9th is the municipal light board right now at 7:30 a.m.
Oh, okay. So, and ours would be in the evening. Okay.
Mhm.
The
All right.
Finance Committee Debt Subcommittee has a meeting scheduled for that evening.
Oh,
That's a potential
But-
conflict
On a
Okay.
Wednesday night?
for sure.
Yeah.
We're diligent, Terry.
So it's a Wednesday night that you're meeting?
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay, all right.
But look, you know, at the end of the day, I think we could probably switch to another day.
Like the second.
Just
kidding.
It's not already scheduled.
Does anyone object to moving the, to rescheduling the public forum to the 9th?
no,
I just heard somebody,
That,
Cynthia's dog does not object. I think.
okay, all right. Okay, are we agreed? We'll do that then? Okay,
and we'll meet the 2nd.
we'll meet the
Yes.
2nd. And we will host the meeting, the public forum on the 9th. And remind all of the people that we've told that it's going to be on the 2nd, that it will be on the 9th. Okay. So,
Yeah, what do can we accomplish anything sort of spoke and hub between these two meetings?
well, I hope we can accomplish modification of the slides that we've talked about.
Okay, and those go to you. Is that correct?
Well, they can go to me, but I'm actually going to be out of pocket for about 10 days. And
Okay.
so
Send-
it'd be
send
very
them to-
helpful
send
if
them to
they,
Yeah,
Okay,
send them to me.
thank you. So they should go to Stephen. And with any ideas for streamlining the presentation, shortening the list of slides. If we're going to have a 15-minute presentation, fundamentally, we should have 20 slides at the most. 15 would be better.
Mhm.
how many do we have? I think it's in that range.
Well, we've got 30 in this show or so, but many of them are gratuitous, or they provide information that we're not going to actually present.
Okay.
And I don't mean gratuitous in a negative way.
Yeah.
So if you looked at the last half a dozen slides in this PowerPoint, they are slides that Parashar, thank you very much, put together that shows current information, capital planning information that is easily available to the public. But it is not, none of those items show an integrated list of everything. Parashar, do you want to say more about that?
Well, I'm not sure I would sort of calibrate that a little bit. I think, so for example, in the town budget, you've got a 5-year table. The description, the brief description for the projects, I think are only for the ones that are funded in the current fiscal year, for example. So again, my quick review, I didn't do an exact comparison, but it certainly appeared that way. I could be wrong. And I think similarly on the school side, the description is very brief. And again, not clear whether there are projects that are sort of, I use the word percolate because, you know, that's how things evolve over time. It wasn't a negative connotation, but as people talk about ideas or projects that need to get done, whether there's a master list somewhere or not, I think is unclear, at least from my quick tour of the two websites. But you know, Carrie and Stephen and Cynthia and Jared and Laurie can help clarify that. That would be great if there's another set of documents elsewhere that actually contain a list that describes those projects in more detail or not.
Thank you.
Can I ask if someone can send out again those slides? Because the version that I have only goes up to slide 22, and it doesn't have those slides.
Okay, I did send it today, but I will send it again.
Oh, okay. I haven't-
It's the same, it's the November 18th PowerPoint revised, REV at the end.
Okay, great.
And so actually, that's the 30, well, now it's 40 slides and counting, but that's the one that had 37 as of this morning.
Yeah.
So why don't I circulate the one that I'm working on? And can I share my screen for just another minute? I know we're trying to get out of here.
Yep.
This was my kind of first take of out breaking down the options. And so, so option one, advisory standing capital planning committee, and then composition appointment options, town manager appointment with staff and residents, select board appointment with residents, select board appointment with elected officials, staff, residents, you know, or some combination thereof. So, I mean, really, in Cynthia, does that capture the distinction between the different types of committees? In a way, it's clear.
Yeah.
Sure.
Lisa,
Okay, so before I
Yeah,
spend a lot of time turning that table into this, I want to make sure that I was on the right track. Okay, stopping share.
Okay, thank you. So any other comments?
Are we going to keep the 2 slides on the advantages and disadvantages, or are we going to try to fit them in the one Stephen's doing?
To be determined. I think we
Okay.
agreed we would keep them and perhaps to move them out of the presentation as more information should we get a question about it.
Well, we'll keep them for now, and I think that's something that's I think a thing that we can hammer down or nail
Okay.
down on the
All right,
second.
let's keep them for now. Okay, great.
So our agenda for December 2nd will look much like the agenda for today. A review of the elements of the public forum. And on December 2nd, we will make assignments for presentation honors. Is that agreeable? Okay.
Yeah. So I'm sorry if you already said this. Stephen, are you going to send out the version that you're working on right now for us to read?
Yeah, it may not be tonight.
That's fine.
But I want to just finish the 2 or 3 slides. And just so we're clear, it's going to be 3 options. I'm taking the 4 that were laid out. And then it'll be status quo and then plus the 2 options. The advisory committee with the composition options and then enhanced process.
Okay.
And I may make up some thoughts on the enhanced process to kind of fill that out. And then we can go from there. So that's just to manage expectations. It's status quo and then the 2 choices.
Sounds good. Thank you.
That's a really good point. And if we have time next December 2nd to talk a little bit about that enhanced process for the forum, I think that would be really useful.
And if anyone else thinks of points that they'd like to make up, please send them to Stephen. Good. All right, thank you all. And I did not do a roll call, Cynthia, at the beginning, so I'm going to do a
got to.
roll call at the end.
Mhm.
And
So motion to adjourn.
thank you. It's now a roll call vote on, oh, is there a second for that motion?
Second,
All right, there's a roll call vote for that motion. Stephen,
Yes.
Cynthia,
yes.
Terry,
Yes.
Carrie,
Yes.
Parashar.
I'm not a voting member, but
Oh,
I'll.
you're not a voting member, but you support it.
He wants to stay.
Apologies. Laurie,
Yes.
Carl,
Yes.
Jared,
Yes.
and I, Elise, vote yes.
Before we leave, is anybody absent today?
No, I don't, no,
No, I don't think so. Okay. I was,
actually not.
Yeah.
Just our open seat is absent.
yes. Oh, yes.
Thank you all for a robust conversation and happy Thanksgiving.
Same to you. Have a great holiday.
Bye-bye.
Great meeting.